You are not supposed to laugh when the Queen of Olympus bends over in her flowing, sky-white robes to pick up a rock. And not even a glamorous rock. Mind you, no glittering quartz, no smooth black obsidian, nothing a jewelry merchant in the Aegean would fight you for. Just a clunky, pale, ordinary rock that looks like it once got stuck in someone's sandal and caused them to trip into a goat. Yet here she is. Hera, wife of Zeus, divine embodiment of marriage, dignity, and cosmic order, casually pocketing rubble like a distracted toddler on a beach walk. And that is how this story begins, with you trailing after the Queen of the Gods, the salty breeze of the Aegean curling into your nose, and the distinct realization that if you had to survive in this world, where even goddesses can have hobbies that look suspiciously like hoarding, you probably wouldn't last the morning. Imagine explaining to an immortal why you don't really want to carry her growing pile of special finds. Spoiler, you'd lose. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. I promise, it'll make the gods less likely to smite me for telling you what Hera's actually up to. Oh, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is. I want to know if Hera's weird collecting habits are lulling you to sleep in Ohio at 2 a.m. or in Singapore over your morning coffee. As Hera straightens up, holding her prize rock like it's the firstborn child of geology, she mutters, "Perfect. Just what I needed." You try not to ask. That's lesson 1. Never ask Hera why. The truth is, she's not alone in odd hobbies. Plenty of gods needed distractions. Poseidon carved dolphins on every surface like a moody teenager. Apollo once tried painting portraits of himself, only to abandon the hobby when everyone complained they looked too smug. Even Zeus had a stash of questionable souvenirs, mostly broken lightning bolts, and the occasional feather from eagles he thought looked majestic. Historians still debate whether that counts as vanity or just occupational hazard, but Hera, being Hera, wasn't collecting out of boredom. She was building something. The catch? What she built looked less like divine order and more like an overstuffed junk drawer. The beach itself smells of salt, brine, and faint decay, exactly what you'd expect from a coastline that has seen both fishermen and minor battles. You hear gulls squabbling overhead, each one sounding suspiciously like philosophers you've heard arguing in Athens. A piece of driftwood brushes against your ankle. Hera swoops in, grabs it, turns it over in her hands, and smiles as if she's uncovered a lost Homeric scroll. "That," she says proudly, "is going in the jar." You glance at her belt, which jingles like an amateur percussionist at a parade. Hanging from it are little jars, amphorae the size of your palm, each with something inside: pebbles, a broken hairpin, maybe even what looks like the chipped corner of an amphitheater seat, and no seashells. That's the thing. She steps past the shining spiral shells scattered across the sand nature's jewelry and chooses a snapped reed instead. "Why not seashells?" you finally dare to ask. She smirks. "Everyone collects seashells, even mortals. It's predictable." She shakes the driftwood in her hand like a lecture pointer, but nobody remembers the broken things, the overlooked things. The gods may guard destiny, but I guard the scraps. Now, if you're thinking this sounds suspiciously like Hera making excuses for kleptomania, you're not alone. In fact, one Roman historian writing centuries later, when Romans were trying very hard to sound smarter than Greeks, recorded that Hera's collections were nothing more than evidence of divine eccentricity. Yet other scholars argued she was preserving relics of cosmic importance. Historians still debate whether Hera was genuinely symbolic in her choices, or if she was simply the goddess of, "Yes, I'll take that, thank you." A donkey brays somewhere inland, startling a crab that scuttles sideways across the sand. Hera ignores both. She crouches again, this time near a tide pool, and frowns at a lump of seaweed. After a moment of intense scrutiny, she scoops it up, wrings it out like wet laundry, and drops it into your hands. "Hold this," she commands. You do, because frankly, arguing with Hera is like arguing with a thunderstorm. You can do it, but you'll regret the outcome. As you shuffle along behind her, sticky seaweed dripping between your fingers, you realize there's a rhythm to her collection. She walks with confidence, pauses, crouches, inspects, claims, and then moves on. It's like watching an archaeologist, except the finds a more stray sandal strap than priceless vase. The weirdest part? Each item, once pocketed, glows faintly for a moment. Nothing flashy, just a subtle shimmer, like candlelight hidden inside glass. Maybe these scraps aren't as ordinary as they look. Or maybe Hera just knows something you don't. She stops abruptly, points inland toward a grove of olives, and says, "That's where I found the first one." You raise an eyebrow. The first what? She doesn't answer. Instead, she pulls out a tiny jar from her belt, uncorks it, and tips it so you can peek inside. You see, what is that? A chicken bone? A nail? Maybe both. She closes it quickly and smiles in a way that makes you glad she's not asking you to guess. This, after all, is Hera's private hobby, one the other gods politely avoid mentioning in public. To bring it up is to risk a withering glare, and you don't want to be on the receiving end of those. The waves lap lazily against the sand, the gulls fade into the distance, and Hera keeps walking. You try to keep count of how many strange objects she's picked up, but you lose track after a shard of amphora with someone's initials scratched in, and half of a clay whistle shaped like a pig. Somewhere out there, historians will argue about what these collections meant. Some will insist they were magical talismans. Others will call them evidence of Hera's obsession with mortal life. Still others will shrug and say, maybe she was just bored of seashells. But here, in the present moment, under the sun and salt air, you're simply the poor mortal who has to carry her seaweed while she scans the shore for her next prize. Don't look so worried, Hera says with a wink. Someday you'll understand why these matter. You're not sure whether that's comforting or ominous. By the time you catch up to Hera again, your arms feel like they belong to a particularly unsuccessful fisherman, dripping seaweed in one hand, clunky stone in the other, sand sticking to your ankles like bees to spilled honey. Hera, meanwhile, strides along with the air of someone curating the world's most confusing museum exhibit. She pauses, squints at the horizon, then digs into her belt of clinking jars like a child fumbling through a box of cereal for the toy prize. Out comes a small clay jar sealed with wax. "This one," she announces, "is my first jar. It looks unimpressive, the kind of pot you'd use to hold 3 olives and a grudge." But when she cracks the seal and tilts it toward the sunlight, you see a jumble of oddities inside. A chipped amphora handle, a coin so corroded you'd swear it once survived a volcanic eruption, and, disturbingly, what appears to be a goat tooth. You fight the urge to recoil. Hera notices, of course, because Hera notices everything. "You don't get it yet," she says, almost kindly. "These are markers, memory tokens. Each one is a story the world would rather forget." The goat tooth glints faintly in the light. You want to ask whether it belonged to a goat sacrificed in her honor, or one that merely bit a shepherd who later cursed the gods, but you decide against it. That kind of question is exactly how mortals get turned into shrubs. She plucks out the chipped amphora handle and rolls it in her hand. "This one," she says, "came from a symposium where philosophers argued so long that the wine jugs gave out before their words did." You can practically hear the bickering across centuries, endless debates about whether motion exists while someone sobers up in the corner. Historians still debate whether that symposium was the legendary endless banquet of Athens, or just another Tuesday in Plato's neighborhood. And then there's the goat tooth. "This," Hera declares proudly, "was from a beast that tried to eat a king's cloak during a sacrifice. The poor animal thought he was reaching for grain. The king thought it was a sign of doom. Everyone panicked. I thought it was hilarious." You blink. You've never heard Hera admit to finding something hilarious before. Apparently, her sense of humor is just odd. She returns the tooth to the jar with reverence, as though it's a crown jewel, then snaps the lid shut. You notice that her hands linger, fingers brushing the rough clay. For all her sarcasm, there's weight in the gesture, as if these trinkets tether her to stories that even immortals might forget. The sea wind picks up, carrying the smell of olives and distant smoke from a shepherd's fire. Hera takes a deep breath, as though the scent itself is another collectible. "Mortals think we gods only, treasure temples and hymns," she muses. "But I prefer what slips between the cracks. The broken handles, the discarded teeth, the whispers left out of the songs. You nod, trying not to imagine an immortal hoarder's paradise stuffed with broken combs and half-burned torches. Odd fact for the day. The first archaeologists of the modern era, centuries later, actually threw out small finds like broken pottery shards because they thought only statues mattered. Imagine what Hera would say about that, probably something involving lightning bolts and very hurt feelings. Back in her day, though, every jar mattered. She shakes another, one filled with small clinks, and you peer inside to see what look like ancient buttons. Not buttons as you know them, no stitched discs of plastic, of course, but carved toggles and bits of bone that once fastened tunics. Tiny, fragile, and all broken. Mortals used to fasten their dignity with these, she remarks. And when they snapped, the wearer lost more than clothing. They lost composure, pride, reputation. She rattles the jar. So I keep them. To remember how fragile pride island. You start to suspect this isn't just a hobby, it's philosophy disguised as clutter. Hera is less of a magpie and more of a cosmic librarian, cataloguing every lost pride, every forgotten quarrel, every goat-related disaster. At least that's the generous interpretation. The less generous? She just likes shiny junk. Historians still debate whether these jars were a symbolic act of preservation, or simply proof that even Olympians needed hobbies as absurd as stamp collecting. She hands you the jar to hold. It's heavier than you expect, the clay warm from the sun, and you hear the muffled rattle of objects shifting inside. You wonder how many jars she owns. 50? 500? A whole storeroom somewhere behind Olympus's throne room? The thought makes you shiver. Hera notices and smirks. Relax. Not every jar holds goat teeth. Some hold much worse. You're about to protest when she laughs, a sound that echoes like wind over marble, and tucks the jar back into her belt. As the waves hiss against the shore, you fall into a rhythm. Hera collecting, you carrying, the jars clinking like offbeat music. It's not seashells. It's never seashells. Seashells, Hera insists, are too easy, too predictable. She prefers the overlooked the evidence that even gods can't polish reality smooth. And maybe, just maybe, these jars are less about hoarding and more about control. A goddess who cannot stop Zeus from his escapades, who cannot untangle mortal wars or fates, can still control this. A jar of broken buttons, a goat tooth, a scrap of amphora. She brushes her hands against her robe and sighs. Each jar is an archive, and one day someone will need them. You don't ask who. You don't want to know. The beach gives way to a patch of cypress trees, their resinous scent sharp in the air, their shadows flickering like restless fingers across the ground. Hera marches into the grove with you, trotting after, your arms full of the day's treasures, while cicadas screech in a chorus so loud it feels like the insects are protesting your very existence. Hera, of course, ignores the noise entirely. She's too busy arranging her jars in a neat semicircle on a flat rock, preparing for what exactly? Some divine garage sale? It turns out she has guests. From the shade of the trees emerge 3 nymphs, robes fluttering, eyes narrowed, each carrying garlands of flowers, as though to remind Hera what normal divine hobbies look like. One holds a basket of narcissus, another clutches irises, and the third is stringing together violets with visible annoyance. When they see Hera proudly polishing a chipped sandal buckle, they collectively sigh, the way one might sigh upon seeing a goose waddle into a temple. Hera, says the tallest nymph, we need to talk about this habit. You immediately wish you could vanish into the bark of the nearest tree. Nothing good comes of nymphs trying to lecture a queen. But Hera, unfazed, smiles serenely. Ah, my favorite critics, come to admire the collection. She holds up the buckle like an exhibit. The nymphs exchange looks. The violet stringer whispers, not quietly enough. Flowers are beautiful, stones are ugly. This is obvious. Now, you have to hand it to Hera. She doesn't snap. She doesn't call lightning. She simply laughs, a sound equal parts honey and thunder. And what happens to your flowers? She asks. They wilt. They fade. They end up pressed between mortal love letters. My finds endure. She taps the buckle. This, my dears, will still exist when your garlands are dust. The narcissus carrier frowns. But what meaning does it have? Meaning, Hera says, leaning closer, is not always beautiful. That shuts them up for a second, but only a second. The nymphs start muttering again, this time about propriety, dignity, and whether Hera should really be setting this kind of example. You imagine a divine Hoa meeting, complete with nymphs filing complaints about Hera's cluttering habits. Odd fact, the Athenians once fined citizens for allowing their courtyards to fill with junk, claiming it was a hazard to public beauty. Historians still debate whether that was an early form of zoning law or just an excuse for neighbors to be nosy. Either way, Hera would not have survived Athenian city planning. The argument builds until even the cicadas quiet down to listen. Hera stands her ground, arms folded, while the nymphs wave their flowers like protest banners. It feels less like a conversation and more like a philosophical standoff, beauty versus durability, petals versus pebbles. Finally, Hera breaks the silence. Tell me, which of your flowers was present when Troy burned? The nymphs blink, confused. Hera lifts one of her jars, pulls out a blackened bronze clasp. This little scrap was dropped by a warrior who fled the flames. He didn't think it mattered, but I knew it would tell a story. What flower was blooming then? Who remembers? The nymphs shuffle uncomfortably. You can't help smirking. Score one for Hera. Still, the tallest nymph tries again. But surely seashells. Seashells are easy. Hera cuts in. Mortals pick them up to remember vacations. I pick up what mortals throw away to forget their shame. That is the difference. There it is again. Hera's philosophy disguised as clutter. You realize you're watching not just a collection, but a world view. She doesn't chase beauty, because beauty never needed her help. She chases memory, because memory always slips away. The nymphs eventually leave, muttering about dreary hobbies and strange queens, their garlands trailing petals like breadcrumbs. Hera watches them go, then carefully tucks the clasp back into its jar. You see, she says to you, almost softly, they think I collect scraps, but I collect truth. It's an unnerving statement, partly because you realize she means it, and partly because a crab leg just slipped out of her robe pocket. She picks it up, dusts it off, and deposits it with reverence into a fresh jar. Historians, centuries later, would try to interpret Hera's truth collecting. Some would argue it was her way of preserving divine justice. Others would say it revealed her insecurity, her need to cling to mortal moments to prove her relevance. Historians still debate which interpretation is less insulting. You, meanwhile, are left with sticky seaweed, sand in your sandals, and the growing suspicion that Hera's jars might just outnumber the stars. Onward, she says, standing, jars clinking. There's always another story underfoot. And with that, you're back to trailing the queen of the gods, trying not to trip over the pebbles she hasn't yet noticed. Zeus, in case you've forgotten, is the sort of god who can never let anyone else have a hobby without butting in. If Poseidon started knitting, Zeus would immediately declare himself the patron deity of scarves. So when Hera began parading around Olympus with jars clinking at her belt like an eccentric street vendor, it was only a matter of time before her husband noticed. And oh, he noticed, you are seated awkwardly at the edge of a marble courtyard, watching as Zeus lounges on a throne that looks like it could double as a lightning storage unit. Hera stands before him, holding a jar in each hand, her expression daring him to say something stupid. This is a gamble, because Zeus almost always says something stupid. What are those? He finally asks, brow furrowed, beard glowing faintly in the sunlight. Collections, Hera replies flatly. Zeus squints into the nearest jar. Is that a sandal strap? Yes, Hera says. From a wedding in Corinth where the groom tripped and fell into the sacrificial fire, the strap broke first. Without it, there would have been no omen, no panic, no festival ban. History turns on scraps. Zeus chuckles. Or maybe he just needed better shoes. He leans back, smug as a cat who thinks it invented purring. You brace yourself for thunderbolts, but Hera surprises you. She doesn't explode. Instead, she smirks. And what do you collect, husband? Besides conquests, illegitimate offspring and excuses. That earns an audible oof from a passing satyr. Odd fact. Ancient Greek courts really did allow litigants to bring broken objects as evidence like snapped handles or cracked vases to prove disputes. Historians still debate whether this was practical law or simply theatre. Either way, Hera could have run the whole system with her jars alone. Zeus, not easily rattled, strokes his beard. I collect victories, cities named after me, thunder worshippers chanting my name. And how many of those cities still exist? Hera shoots back, rattling her jars like dice. How many chants will last longer than this sandal strap? The courtyard goes silent, except for the distant crackle of someone roasting barley cakes. Even the wind seems to lean in for gossip. Finally, Zeus laughs loud, booming, like someone trying to cover embarrassment with volume. Fine, fine, keep your jars, wife. But don't expect me to join your scavenger hunts. The irony, of course, is that a week later you catch him sneaking into the palace with a broken spear tip clutched in his enormous hand. Hera raises an eyebrow but says nothing. Zeus tries to act nonchalant, muttering something about historical significance. You can't help but smile. The king of gods has been infected by the collecting bug. That night, during a storm that rattles every column of Olympus, Hera quietly arranges her jars while Zeus pretends to sleep. Every so often you hear a faint clink from his side of the bed, as if he's hiding his own jar under the blankets. Historians centuries later would speculate, because historians can't help themselves, that Zeus's supposed private collection explained the random caches of odd items found in ruined temples. Shards of metal, snapped arrows, unremarkable rocks. Some argue these were ritual offerings. Others wonder if they were simply Zeus trying to imitate his wife without admitting it. Historians still debate which is funnier. Meanwhile, Hera glows with smug triumph. She doesn't need seashells, not when she has sandal straps, goat teeth, and now apparently a husband playing copycat. She notices your grin and winks. Even kings of gods can't resist a good jar. You decide not to mention that, in the mortal world, people will eventually invent stamp collecting. Hera would laugh herself hoarse. By now you've learned two things. First, never underestimate Hera's stamina when she's in treasure hunting mode. And second, her jars have a habit of multiplying like rabbits. So when she announces, "We're going to visit Hephaestus," you immediately suspect she's not planning a motherly check-in. The forge of Hephaestus is exactly as loud, smoky, and uncomfortable as you'd imagine. Sparks fly from anvils, hammers clang like endless thunder, and the air smells like hot iron mixed with old socks. Hephaestus, bent-backed but sharp-eyed, looks up from a half-finished shield when Hera sweeps in, dragging you behind her. "Mother," he grunts, "what brings you here?" "Don't say it's another argument with father." "Worse," Hera replies with a perfectly straight face. "I need your scraps." You try not to laugh. Truly you do. But there's something inherently funny about the Queen of Olympus, demanding leftover junk like a mortal rummaging through a blacksmith's trash heap. Hephaestus blinks. "My scraps?" "Yes," Hera insists. Bent nails, twisted rivets, fragments of chainmail, things mortals ignore, but which tell stories. You of all gods should understand the beauty of what others discard. There's a silence in which even the hammers seem to pause. Hephaestus scratches his beard, muttering, "Well, I suppose I do have bins of failures." He waves a hand toward a dark corner where heaps of mangled bronze glint faintly. Hera's eyes light up. She strides over, crouches, and begins examining the debris with the intensity of a jeweler appraising diamonds. You hover nervously, half afraid she'll cut herself on something sharp, half worried she'll make you carry it all. Spoiler, she will. She plucks up a rivet shaped like a question mark. "This one," she declares, "must have belonged to a shield abandoned on the field at Salamis." Hephaestus shrugs. "Or it just bent funny when I dropped it." "Details," Hera replies. "History doesn't care about intentions. It cares about evidence." Odd fact, archaeologists really do find failed metalwork in ancient forges, and debates rage about whether these were training mistakes, rejected commissions, or ritual discards. Historians still debate whether Hera would have been the original curator of such collections. Meanwhile, Hephaestus warms to the idea. "You know, mother," he says, "some scraps are dangerous. A nail from a cursed helmet. A shard of bronze once worn by a coward. These carry energy. Hera's eyes gleam. Perfect. I'll take those too. You groan inwardly. Because of course, when she says, I'll take those too, what she means is, you, mortal assistant, will lug them in a sack up Olympus's very steep stairs. She digs deeper, pulling out twisted arrowheads, broken hinges, and something that looks disturbingly like a melted bronze moustache. Marvelous, she coos, as though she's shopping at a divine boutique. Hephaestus hands her a small pile of bent nails. Here, consider them souvenirs. Hera beams. See, even you understand. The gods create, the gods destroy. But someone must remember the bits in between. You're not sure whether she's waxing poetic or justifying hoarding again, but either way, she's winning. On the way out, you pass Apollo, who has dropped by to commission a shiny new lyre. He pauses, staring at the bulging sack slung over your back. What's all that? Artifacts. Hera reply primly. Looks like trash, Apollo mutters. Without missing a beat, Hera says, and yet one day mortals will worship your broken strings too. You nearly choke trying to suppress a laugh. Apollo, flustered, storms off. Hera clinks her jars in satisfaction. By the time you leave the forge, sweat slicking your face and bronze dust coating your sandals, Hera is humming a tune that sounds suspiciously like victory. She pats the sack of scraps and declares, now the collection has weight. You resist the urge to point out that your spine also now has weight. A lot of it. Night falls over the mountain, and Hera, instead of going to bed like a reasonable goddess, insists on dragging you up to a craggy ledge where a circle of owls perches. You expect silence, maybe a spooky hoot or two. Instead, the moment Hera settles cross-legged on the stone, the owls launch into an academic debate loud enough to rival the marketplace in Athens. Who, says the fattest one, would classify a goat tooth as historically significant? Another owl hoots back. Who cares about goat teeth when the real artifact is the sandal strap? Hera clears her throat like a professor about to moderate a conference panel. Gentlemen, she says. And lady, the smallest owl bows. You've been summoned to advise me. You rub your eyes. You're not hallucinating. Hera has, in fact, convened an academic symposium of owls. Odd fact. Owls really were associated with Athena, goddess of wisdom. Some ancient sources even describe them as conference companions, though historians still debate whether this was metaphorical or whether Greeks genuinely imagined owls staging late-night debates. Judging by what's happening before you, maybe it wasn't metaphor. One owl flaps indignantly. Athena would never waste her time on trinkets. Hera narrows her eyes. Athena wastes her time on mortals who can't even pronounce hexameter. At least I collect what's real. The owls erupt, their hoots overlapping like argumentative professors with no sense of time limits. One demands a classification system. Another insists Hera's jars are proto-archives. A third mutters that this entire project is unbecoming of a goddess, though his voice cracks, betraying owl puberty. You try not to laugh, but the absurdity is overwhelming. A goddess with jars of junk, defended by owls holding an emergency colloquium under the moonlight, it's like falling into a very scholarly children's book. Hera, ever patient, lets them squabble until the noise dwindles into mutters. Then she produces a jar from her belt and places it in the center of the circle. Inside is a dull bronze coin, worn smooth. This, Hera says, was once exchanged for a loaf of bread in Sparta. Nothing grand, nothing glorious. Yet it fed a soldier who lived to fight another day. Without it, history bends another way. Who will remember him, if not me? The owls tilt their heads, blinking solemnly. The fattest one finally says, Who are we to argue with memory? You grin, because even owls can be guilt-tripped. The rest nod in solemn approval, and one even suggests Hera's collection could use a catalogue, though the idea of the Queen of the Gods filing paperwork seems unlikely. Hera, however, accepts with a satisfied nod. Historians, centuries later, would argue about whether Hera's so-called academic night councils were allegories for divine wisdom or just a poet's attempt at owl-based comedy. Historians still debate if there was ever really an owl that suggested a filing system. Meanwhile, Hera stands, scoops up her jar, and bows faintly to the owls. Thank you, colleagues. They hoot in chorus, which sounds suspiciously like applause, and scatter into the night. You're left staring at Hera, who dusts off her hands and says, "See? Even Athena's creatures respect the work." You mutter, "Or they were just tired of arguing." She hears you, of course. She always hears you. But instead of punishing you, she smiles. Same thing. And then she walks on, jars clinking in rhythm, the debate of owls still echoing in your ears like a very strange academic podcast. If you thought Hera's jars were harmless, wait until you hear about the Trojan hairpin incident. It begins, predictably, with Hera rummaging through her belt like someone searching for car keys. Out comes a slim bronze pin, crooked at the end, gleaming faintly in the torchlight. She holds it up proudly, as if she's unveiling a crown jewel. "This," she says, "once started a war." You blink. "A hairpin?" She nods gravely. "Not the war, don't get excited. Just a little skirmish." But still, the story unfolds as you walk with her down a narrow path lined with cypress trees, their resin scent sharp in your nose. Hera slips into the past with ease, weaving words like threads in a tapestry. You see it as she describes it. A feast in Troy, women laughing, men boasting, wine flowing like rivers. A princess drops her hairpin, this very one and all, Tartarus breaks loose. Apparently, a nobleman's wife accused another woman of stealing it. Harsh words followed. Goblets tipped. Someone threw a leg of lamb, and before anyone could say, "Achilles' heel," a dozen warriors were grappling on the palace floor. Odd fact. The ancient Greeks did believe small objects could spark omens, quarrels, or even wars. Some historians argue Helen's abduction was remembered because it fit into this pattern of small cause, massive chaos. Historians still debate whether Homer exaggerated or whether the Greeks genuinely thought the world teetered on hairpins and sandals. Back in the present, Hera tucks the hairpin safely away. "Everyone remembers the great wars," she murmurs. "But no one remembers the stupid quarrels that led to them. I do." You imagine dusty future historians arguing, was Hera's jar keeping symbolic of divine foresight, or was she just nosy about mortal drama? Either way, she's got receipts, and they jingle every time she walks. The moon slips behind a cloud, the forest path darkens, and Hera's collection clinks softly at her side. You realize, with a strange shiver, that in her jars lie not just scraps, but the sparks of forgotten battles, the kind no bard would waste ink on, but which still changed someone's life. "Remember this," Hera says, glancing at you. "History bends not with thrones, but with hairpins." You nod quickly, clutching your sack of scraps tighter, vowing never again to underestimate the power of lost accessories. The next morning, long before the sun has warmed the marble steps of Olympus, Hera summons you to yet another of her projects. You shuffle into the courtyard, yawning, only to find Argus Panoptes, her loyal, many-eyed servant, already waiting with an enormous pile of nearly identical pebbles. Yes, pebbles. Grey, round, perfectly ordinary. The kind of thing you'd kick absent-mindedly down a road. Hera folds her arms, looks at the mountain of rocks and says, "Sort them." Argus blinks all 100 eyes at once. "Sort them? How, my queen?" "By story," Hera replies, as though this clarifies anything. You drop your sack of scrap metal with a groan. Argus sighs with the weariness of a man who once guarded a cow for weeks without sleep. Together, you crouch at the pile, trying to tell whether one pebble is any more interesting than another. Spoiler, they're not. "Here's one from Thermopylae," Hera insists, holding up a stone. Argus peers at it. "Looks like a rock." "It is a rock," Hera says, "but it once bruised the shin of a Spartan soldier. Therefore, significant." Odd fact. In excavations around Greek battlefields, archaeologists really do find piles of stones thrown by slingers. Some were carefully chosen for shape and weight, like primitive ammunition. Historians still debate whether Hera's pebble stories were inspired by such projectiles, or whether she just had an unlimited imagination. The sorting continues. Hera claims one pebble was kicked by Alexander's horse on his way to Asia, another once rested in a temple courtyard where a priest tripped, and a third was part of the road to Delphi, trodden by countless pilgrims. Argus dutifully arranges them into neat little piles while muttering, "All look the same to me." At one point, he lifts two nearly identical stones and asks, "Which of these is more important?" Hera doesn't miss a beat. Both. One represents arrogance, the other represents humility. You want to ask how on earth she knows which is which, but then you remember, Hera doesn't like questions. Besides, you suspect the answer would involve another jar, and your back can't take more jars. Eventually, Argus, perhaps out of sheer desperation, invents categories. Pebbles that hurt people, pebbles that tripped people, and pebbles Hera just likes. Hera approves. She even rewards him by letting him keep one, though given Argus has 100 eyes, the pebble probably doesn't feel all that special. By the end of the exercise, the courtyard looks like an avant-garde art installation. Little cairns of rocks labelled, at least in Hera's head, with stories no mortal would ever believe. "See," Hera says, dusting off her hands. "Even the smallest stones carry the weight of history." Argus mutters something about back pain carrying the weight of history, but wisely keeps it under his breath. As the sun climbs higher, Hera gathers the most distinguished pebbles into a jar, sealing it with wax. You notice a faint shimmer inside, as if the stones themselves are humming with untold stories. Or maybe that's just your imagination, worn thin by too much rock sorting. Either way, Hera seems pleased. She pats the jar like a proud parent and declares, "Another archive complete." You groan. Argus blinks. And somewhere in the distance, philosophers already begin arguing whether Hera's obsession with pebbles means history is built on grand events or stubbed toes. Historians still debate. If there is one god you don't want anywhere near Hera's jars, it's Hermes. Mischief is to Hermes what olive oil is to Greek cuisine. He puts it everywhere, and no one can stop him. So, of course, the day comes when he spots Hera's carefully arranged jars sitting in the sun and gets ideas. You arrive just in time to witness the god of trickery tiptoeing across the marble courtyard, sandals barely whispering, grin plastered across his face. In his hand, a fistful of shiny drachmae. Not magical, not historical, just ordinary coins. He crouches at Hera's collection like a child sneaking candy into a cereal box. He pops open one jar, plucks out a cracked spindle whorl, and replaces it with 2 coins. He chuckles. Wait until she thinks the mortals have been minting their own artifacts. Another jar gets the same treatment. Out goes a bent nail. In go 3 coins. Hermes is humming cheerfully now, and you, against your better judgment, are rooted to the spot, watching history's weirdest burglary unfold. Odd fact. In actual Greek sanctuaries, archaeologists have found coin hoards deliberately buried, sometimes alongside ordinary broken objects. Historians still debate whether these were ritual deposits, emergency stashes, or pranks that got out of hand. Hermes, apparently, votes for prank. The problem is Hera arrives sooner than Hermes expects. She strides in, eyes sharp as daggers, jars clinking at her belt. The moment she sees Hermes crouched by her collection, her face goes colder than a Spartan winter. "Hermes," she says in a tone that makes you want to hide under a rock. He straightens quickly, trying his most innocent smile. "Ah, dear stepmother, just improving the aesthetic. A little shine here, a little commerce there." He jingles the coins in his palm. Hera walks over, lifts one of the tampered jars, and shakes it. The cheerful chime of coins echoes. Slowly, deliberately, she removes a coin, holds it up, and says, "What story does this tell?" Hermes falters. An important trade deal? Commerce fueling civilization? Mortals getting very excited about shiny things?" Hera drops the coin. It clatters on the marble with the lonely finality of a failed exam. She glares at him. "These tell no story. They are mere currency. My jars are for memory, not vanity." Hermes chuckles weakly. "Come now. Surely even you can appreciate a little fun." The silence that follows is so tense you can practically hear Argus blinking in the background. Then Hera smiles, a smile so sweet it should come with a warning label. "Very well," she says. "If coins are so amusing, you will carry them. Every single one." A moment later, Hermes is staggering under a sack of coins that jingles with each step, clearly enchanted so it grows heavier the more he struggles. You try not to laugh, but when he shoots you a pleading look, you shrug. You know better than to intervene. Historians, centuries later, would puzzle over random jars of coins discovered in temple ruins. Some would declare them sacred offerings. Others would argue they were evidence of forgotten economies. Historians still debate whether they were, in fact, just Hermes's punishment preserved by time. Meanwhile, Hera calmly replaces her bent nail and cracked spindle whirl, smiling in quiet victory. She turns to you, eyes twinkling. This is why I do not collect seashells. Too easy to tamper with. Hermes groans under the weight of his coin sack, muttering curses that sound like bird calls. You, wisely, keep quiet. Dinner on Olympus is supposed to be elegant ambrosia, nectar, a little lyre music, and the occasional thunderclap for atmosphere. But when Hera brings her jars to the table, the entire evening derails faster than a chariot on muddy roads. You sit awkwardly at the far end, plate piled with figs and honey, as the gods gather. Apollo is tuning his lyre, Artemis is feeding scraps to her hounds under the table, and Ares is already drunk, shouting about cavalry formations. Then Hera clears her throat and sets a jar directly in the center of the table, like it's the main course. Tonight, she announces, we dine with history. Zeus groans audibly. Athena arches an eyebrow. Dionysus pauses mid-sip, and Hermes, still limping from his coin-carrying punishment, nearly chokes on his grape. Hera lifts the jar, uncorks it, and withdraws what looks like a cracked wooden comb. She holds it aloft like a relic. This, she proclaims, was once dropped by a Spartan bride on her wedding night, a simple accident, or a sign of doubt in the marriage. Historians still debate. Apollo strums a sarcastic chord. Or maybe she just had slippery fingers. Artemis smirks. Why are we talking about combs when there's roast venison? But Hera is undeterred. She places the comb on the table beside the ambrosia bowl. Because even the smallest objects bear meaning. The stories mortals forget are the stories I keep. Zeus mutters into his goblet. Here we go again. Odd fact. Ancient banquets did often involve displaying strange objects or treasures as conversation pieces. Some philosophers even wrote treatises on symposium curiosities. Historians still debate whether these were genuine or invented anecdotes, but clearly Hera was ahead of her time. The evening spirals. Hera pulls out a broken fibula, the clothing fastener, not the leg bone though you briefly panic, declaring it a symbol of humility. Dionysus, tipsy and inspired, tries to wear it as a nose ring. Ares, unimpressed, throws it at a wall to see if it sticks. It does not. Athena finally sighs. Mother, with all respect, must we discuss bent nails and broken combs at dinner? Yes, Hera says firmly. Because these scraps outlast marble statues. One crack tells more truth than 10 praises. There's a tense silence, broken only by the crunch of Ares gnawing loudly on a bone. Then, surprisingly, Poseidon nods. She's right. I've seen whole temples crumble. But one lost fishing hook tells you more about a sailor's life than all the inscriptions combined. The room goes still. For once, Poseidon has said something profound instead of grumbling about earthquakes. Hera beams. Exactly. Zeus sighs like a man defeated by logic he doesn't care for. Apollo rolls his eyes. Hermes mumbles something about coins being more fun. But you can feel it. Hera has scored a point. Historians, centuries later, would puzzle over banquet records where gods supposedly argued about objects instead of politics. Some would dismiss them as satire. Others would insist they were allegories for divine priorities. Historians still debate whether a cracked comb ever really sat at the high table of Olympus. For you, though, it's just another long night of eating figs while Hera lectures everyone on the significance of trash. At least the venison is good. You think Hera's jars can't possibly get more complicated until mortals get involved. It starts in a sleepy hillside village, the kind of place where goats outnumber people and gossip is considered a competitive sport. Hera, disguised in a plain cloak, leads you down the dusty path. The villagers, wide-eyed, bow nervously as she passes. They've heard stories of her wrath, but today she wears an oddly gentle smile. The elders step forward, carrying a woven basket. They lift the cloth covering it, and inside lies the most uninspiring collection of offerings you've ever seen. Cracked clay cups, half-burned torches, worn sandals with holes big enough to whistle through. You brace for Hera's fury. Surely these are insults compared to golden statues and fragrant sacrifices. But Hera gasps with delight. These are perfect, she declares, lifting a sandal with broken straps. A gift of memory, not vanity. You honor me more than kings with temples. The villagers exchange confused looks, but relief washes over their faces. Hera, apparently, is pleased with their junk. Odd fact, ancient sanctuaries sometimes received humble offerings, old tools, broken figurines, even everyday utensils. Archaeologists often dismiss them as low-value votives, but some argue they held personal, intimate meaning. Historians still debate whether such offerings reflected poverty, devotion, or both. Back in the village, Hera accepts each item like it's sacred. A cracked cup. This once quenched thirst. A burned torch. This once held back darkness. A frayed rope. This once tethered a family's only donkey. She tucks them carefully into jars, sealing each with wax. The villagers, emboldened, start bringing more. A child shyly offers a chipped doll. Hera strokes the fragment tenderly. A child's joy deserves to be remembered. By the end of the day, the village square looks like an open-air junkyard, and Hera looks like a goddess at a festival. She thanks the people, promising them quiet nights, fertile goats, and fewer lightning strikes, small but valuable blessings. You, meanwhile, stagger under a sack so heavy it feels like you're carrying all of mortal history. Hera beams at you as though you should be proud. That night, as the village settles into sleep, Hera arranges her new finds by the fire. Mortals think I demand grandeur, she muses, but what I crave is honesty. Their broken things speak louder than polished lies. Somewhere, far in the future, historians will puzzle over why so many shrines contain cracked, ordinary objects. They will publish long papers about ritual deposition theory and symbolic fragmentation. Historians still debate whether the villagers gave their scraps out of devotion or just because they couldn't afford better. But you were there. You saw Hera's eyes light up at each offering, and you realize, this is what seashells never could have given her. You should have known Hera's jars wouldn't all fit in her palace chambers forever. Eventually, she needed a proper vault, a place big enough to swallow centuries of scraps. So one evening she beckons you down a winding path behind Olympus, torch in hand, until you reach a cavern mouth yawning like the world's oldest secret. This, she declares, is the archive. The air inside is cool and musty, tinged with mineral damp and faint olive smoke. Your footsteps echo. The torchlight flickers against walls carved with niches, each niche cradling a jar sealed with wax, lined up like soldiers in a silent army. Hundreds of jars, maybe thousands. The sight makes your knees weak. She walks slowly down the rows, fingers brushing clay lids. Each one, she murmurs, a story mortals forgot. You stop at a jar labeled with faint scratches, a fishbone, bleached white. Hera explains, it was dropped by a fisherman who lied about his catch. His neighbors laughed for years. Without the fishbone, no one would recall the lie. Another jar holds a melted lump of bronze. From a votive candle in a forgotten shrine, Hera says. It burned too quickly. Mortals thought the gods were impatient. They were right. Odd fact. Real ancient sanctuaries often contain deposits of melted wax and discarded offerings, confusing archaeologists for generations. Historians still debate whether these were accidents, deliberate symbols, or simply ancient trash. As you move deeper, the jars grow stranger. A cracked doll's head, a splinter from a demolished throne, a charred twig said to be from the pyre of a nameless soldier. Each glows faintly when Hera touches it, as though infused with some lingering pulse of memory. You whisper, "Why keep so many?" Hera stops, gazes at you through the torchlight. Because even gods forget. Memory is fragile. If I don't keep these, history becomes only statues and crowns. That's not truth. Truth lives in the scraps. Her voice echoes, soft but sharp, in the cavern's stillness. You shiver. realizing this isn't just hobby, it's obsession. A cosmic filing system no mortal scribe could ever match. And yet, there's dust. Some jars are cobwebbed, their wax seals brittle. Hera admits she hasn't opened some in centuries. Even truth can nap, she says with a faint smile. Oddly enough, you feel comforted by the dust. It means even Hera, curator of everything broken, allows her collection to sleep. Maybe not every story needs constant retelling. She sets her torch in a bronze bracket, her face lit in warm orange. One day, she whispers, mortals will dig here. They'll find my jars. They'll argue endlessly about what they mean. And that will be the greatest joke of all. You almost laugh because you can already imagine the footnotes. Historians still debate whether Hera's cavern was myth or metaphor, an allegory of memory, or a goddess's eccentric pastime. You know the truth. It was real, dusty, and smelled faintly of goat. And in the heart of the cavern, surrounded by 1,000 jars, Hera smiles with the satisfaction of a goddess who has turned the forgotten into a kingdom all her own. By now you've realized that if there's one group guaranteed to ruin anything fun, it's philosophers. Sure enough, word of Hera's archives spreads down to Athens, and before long the entire agora is buzzing. One group insists her jars are proof of divine foresight. Another claims they're evidence of madness. And naturally, half a dozen philosophers decide to argue about it in public until everyone regrets having ears. You find yourself seated on a stone bench, while Hera herself hovers invisibly at your side, listening with thinly veiled amusement. Socrates, yes. That Socrates paces the square, rubbing his chin. So, he declares, the goddess collects broken sandals and goat teeth. But what is the essence of brokenness? And does a goat tooth cease to be a goat tooth once removed from the goat? The crowd groans. A fishmonger mutters, "Here we go again." Plato chimes in, adjusting his robe. Clearly, the jars represent imperfect shadows of ideal forms. The broken sandal points toward the perfect sandal in the realm of forms, unseen but eternal. A potter shouts, "Tell that to my feet." Then along comes Diogenes, carrying a dead chicken under his arm. He waves it like a flag. Look, a plucked mortal. Would Hera put this in a jar? Odd fact, Diogenes really did once present a plucked chicken to mock Plato's definition of man as a featherless biped. Historians still debate whether he was a genius or just the ancient world's best troll. Meanwhile, Aristotle, more practical, scribbles notes on a wax tablet. Perhaps the jars are data, observations of human folly, a proto-science, if you will. Socrates scoffs. Data is useless without meaning. Hera, still invisible, leans over to whisper in your ear. They think too much. They should just ask me. You nearly choke, but manage to stay quiet. Because if the philosophers did realize Hera was listening, you'd be here all week watching Socrates try to debate a goddess into defining truth while she pelts him with pebbles. The debate spirals. One camp insists Hera is preserving justice. Another claims she's hoarding junk to prove a point about mortality. A third insists the jars are allegories invented by poets to warn mortals against hubris. No one agrees, of course. Historians still debate whether any of these arguments even came close. Finally, Diogenes bites into his chicken leg and growls. She collects because she can. That's it. The crowd actually applauds. You glance at Hera. She smirks, pleased. Not because Diogenes got it right, but because mortals are now arguing about her jars instead of seashells. And for Hera, that's victory enough. As the philosophers bicker into the evening, the sun dips low, painting the agora gold. You stand, stretch your aching back, and follow Hera as she slips away unseen, her jars clinking softly. Behind you, the voices rise, still chasing definitions like dogs chasing their own tails. Hera chuckles. Let them argue. It only makes the collection stronger. If philosophers were bad enough, imagine what happens when Athena gets involved. Hera's half-sister, goddess of wisdom, strategy, and smugness, had tolerated the jars for a while. But sooner or later, rivalry was inevitable. It begins at a council meeting on Olympus. The gods gather to discuss mortal petitions, but instead of focusing on famine, wars, or whether a certain Spartan king has sacrificed enough goats. The two sisters end up in a passive-aggressive duel. Hera clinks one of her jars onto the table. Athena responds by producing a scroll thicker than your arm. Notes, Athena says sweetly, from every philosophical debate in Athens this season. Scraps, Hera counters. Mere words. My jars contain life. Athena unfurls her scroll with theatrical flair. And yet, written wisdom endures when sandals rot. Hera rattles her jars. But sandals prove mortals walked. Scrolls prove only that mortals talked. The council groans. Even Apollo hides his face in his hands. But you're riveted, watching two of Olympus's most powerful women bicker like rival librarians. Odd fact. There really were rivalries between oral and written traditions in Greece. Some argued stories should be sung, others that they should be written. Historians still debate which method preserved truer memory. If they'd seen Hera and Athena, they'd know the answer was neither. It was about winning. Athena, never one to back down, ups the ante. She summons an owl, which drops a pouch of miniature scrolls onto the table. Here, she declares. Every decree from the Areopagus this year. Hera smirks and opens a jar, revealing a half-burnt torch. And here is the torch that lit the courtroom when one of those decrees was read. Without this, your words would have been heard in darkness. Which is more important? A murmur of appreciation ripples through the room. Even Poseidon mutters, she's got a point. Athena flushes. For a goddess famed for logic, losing an argument to burnt junk stings. She rolls up her scrolls, muttering something about contextual artifacts. Hera, triumphant, leans back and lets her jars clink like applause. Historians, centuries later, would try to interpret myths of Hera and Athena's rivalry. Some framed them as allegories of domesticity versus intellect, others as symbolic of oral versus written memory. Historians still debate whether any of this had roots in real cult practices, or whether poets simply loved imagining divine sibling squabbles. You meanwhile see it for what it is. Two sisters locked in the eternal contest of who collects better trivia. Hera keeps sandals, Athena keeps footnotes. Neither is backing down. By the end of the meeting, Zeus bangs his fist on the table, lightning crackling. Enough, mortals are starving, and you're arguing about scraps and scrolls. Hera and Athena both turn to him, and, in perfect unison, snap. This is important. Zeus sighs, utterly defeated. You quietly take another fig, because you know better than to get between those two. At long last, after countless jars, arguments, and goat teeth, you stumble into the heart of Hera's mystery. She leads you up a high ridge overlooking the Aegean, the air cool, the sea shimmering silver in the moonlight. Her belt of jars jingles like wind chimes, but this time she carries one larger jar in her hands, cradled as carefully as a mother with an infant. This, she whispers, is the first and the last. She sets it on a flat stone. You lean closer, expecting another pebble or broken buckle. Instead, inside lies something shockingly ordinary. A faded strip of woven cloth, frayed at the edges, no bigger than a handkerchief. It looks like it once wrapped bread, or maybe a child's toy. You blink. That's it? Hera smiles softly. That's it, she explains. Long ago, on a nameless morning, in a nameless village, a mortal girl dropped this cloth while fetching water. No war followed, no poem celebrated it. The girl probably never even noticed it was gone. But Hera noticed. She picked it up and kept it. Why, you ask? Hera's gaze drifts to the horizon. Because gods are worshipped for power, for thunder, for beauty. But I wanted to remember what no one else would. Seashells, jewels, thrones, they do not need me. But scraps? Scraps vanish. Unless someone keeps them. For the first time, you see past the jars, the endless collecting, the debates with owls and philosophers. It's not about clutter, it's about loneliness. Hera, queen of gods, surrounded by glory, chooses instead to guard the overlooked, because even a goddess longs to hold on to something fragile. Odd fact, archaeologists still uncover bits of cloth in ancient graves, preserved by accident, more intimate than gold. Historians still debate whether these were ritual, practical, or sentimental. Perhaps the truth is all three. Hera closes the jar, sealing it with a quiet click. What I really wanted, she admits, was not seashells or sandal straps. I wanted proof that even the smallest lives matter, and if I must collect forever to keep them safe, then so be it. She stands, lifts the jar, and turns back toward Olympus. You follow silently, the weight of her words pressing heavier than all the sacks of junk you've carried. Behind you, the sea whispers against the rocks. Ahead, Hera's jars clink in rhythm with her steps. And you understand, finally, that her collection isn't about objects at all. It's about memory, love, and the quiet defiance of refusing to let anything be forgotten. The night deepens. Hera slows her pace, her voice softening like dusk itself. You've walked with me long enough, she says. Now rest. Her jars jingle faintly, like lullabies in clay. The cool breeze brushes your cheek. The stars blur at the edges of your vision. Hera's words stretch into gentle waves. Even broken things have meaning. Even forgotten things are worthy. Sleep, little mortal. Tomorrow, history will still be here. The clink of jars fades into silence. The world softens. You drift, the scraps of memory blending into dreams. The jars are quiet now, their lids sealed, their stories resting. Hera has gone, leaving you in a meadow where the grass bends under the weight of night's gentlest breeze. The air is cool and slow, the stars stretched across the sky like lazy brushstrokes. Your body eases, sinking into the earth beneath you. Each breath lengthens, each thought softens. You are no longer carrying sacks of goat teeth and bent nails. You are carrying nothing at all. The sound of the sea is distant, steady, like the breathing of the world itself. Waves roll and fade, a rhythm older than God's. The grass brushes your skin with feather-light touches. A cricket sings, then pauses, then sings again. Somewhere far away, jars sit in rows, patient and unmoving. They do not need you to tend them. They do not demand anything of you. They simply exist, keeping their secrets, while you rest. The night sky lowers itself, velvet and endless. You feel your eyelids grow heavy, like shutters closing over windows. Each blink lasts longer than the last. Hera's whisper lingers faintly. Even broken things deserve rest. Let the fragments of the day drift away like dust. Let your thoughts scatter like pebbles in the tide. You are whole, even in pieces. You are safe, even in silence. Breathe in, slow and steady. Breathe out, softer still. The world narrows to calm darkness, to weightless quiet, to the promise of sleep. And in that silence you drift,